We're joined on the show now by the author of How Are You Gonna Pay for That? Smart Answers to the Dumbest Questions in Politics, Ryan Cooper. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. Obviously, it's I think on its face, cover alone, fascinating topic for a book. What made you want to start looking into what you deem the dumbest questions in politics, and how do you go about choosing what qualifies as one of those dumbest questions?
Well, I will have to admit that there's some kind of stiff competition for that particular title. I think one of my primary motivations was watching the presidential debates in 2016, in which the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is like basically an austerity org, like a pressure group, got a question in every single debate. And in all of them combined, there was one short discussion of climate change. And it just drove me absolutely nuts. I started my career in journalism in 2011 when the economy was doing worse than it at any point since the 1930s. You had mass unemployment, clearly causing like serious, political damage. And the entire political class in DC, people maybe forget this, but from about 2010 through 2013ish, there was this panic attack over the budget deficit, and part of the panic attack, the politics of that was this notion that whenever you're doing any kind of program, Medicare for all or anything else, you have to account for it dollar for dollar with tax increases, which are viewed as a kind of like imposition, like a kind of theft from the pre-political economy. And it's just an incredibly toxic mindset that I think helped produce Trump, honestly.
Yeah, and you seem to be implying that there are other things that might also be expensive, but that do not have to be accounted for immediately dollar for dollar with revenue increases and those sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have the defense budget, which everybody votes for. It's been like 9.2, 9.6, depending on how you count it, but like in the ballpark of $9 to $10 trillion over the last decade. And it's only gone up after we ended the war in Afghanistan. I don't understand why we don't get a peace dividend anymore, but it is what it is. But in terms of paying for it, I think the biggest and craziest way that people discuss this sort of thing is healthcare. Because the thing about healthcare is we already pay for the most expensive healthcare system in the world by far. If we paid what Germany pays as a share of our economy, we'd save $1 trillion a year. If we paid Canada's prices for their Medicare for all system, our taxes would go down. We already pay more in taxes to support our government healthcare programs than Canada does to pay for their universal single payer. So we're just getting completely ripped off, coming and going. We also have the worst health care outcomes of any rich country. And so, it's this invocation of how you're going to pay for it is like sort of just intended to shut up Bernie Sanders, basically, and prevent, any kind of social democratic policy.
I have often felt that, actually. Well, look, I'm glad that you brought up healthcare because you have a lot of different topics that you go into in the book. These fun explainers about a bunch of different questions that people might come across, and some of the ones about healthcare are the ones that interested me the most. So you sort of flip the question kind of a little bit, and you talk about how Medicare for all, how switching to it could actually lower the amount that we end up spending. How exactly would that happen?
It's a very complicated system that we have now. I mean, that's honestly one of the biggest problems with it. That we, it's the bureaucracy is so huge and incomprehensible. That's what wastes so much money. Part of what wastes so much money. But I think basically the way to think about it is we have this incredibly inefficient private health insurance system that provides very bad coverage. That's getting worse every year to about half the population. And then we have half the population that's on various government programs, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, the VA, the Indian Health Service, and a few other little programs. And so basically, what I'm talking about is consolidating all that stuff into like a Medicare for all type program would simplify everything radically and allow the government to control the prices that everyone is paying for all these services. It would finally that would be the kind of cost controls that would actually start to cut down that $1 trillion gap, that we have with Germany, and end up with, basically where people are radically money ahead in terms of their, discretionary take-home pay. And the fact of the matter is, like, leaving the status quo in place, it's the healthcare cost bloat is just devouring the economy from the inside out. All of our raises have been going to, healthcare costs for the last 40 years. And it's unsustainable, frankly.
And you believe that not only could we, by switching over the system, save money overall, but that could then trickle down into actual lower taxes, which is exactly the opposite way that this conversation is generally talked about.
Yeah, the thing about what amounts to sort of setting prices for everything is that you could save as little or as much as you wanted to. So it would be theoretically possible to go all the way down to Canada's prices and end up without having to raise taxes a dime. I think that's probably realistically a little bit too disruptive. But suppose that you count health insurance premiums as taxes, which they basically are, since they're mandatory payments, according to the law and according to, like, people, nobody turns down their health insurance at their job. So you got to pay that money. If you count those mandatory payments as taxes, American workers are the second most highly taxed in the OECD, just behind the Netherlands. And so effectively, if we were to do Medicare for all in a reasonable fashion, cut down to get fairly close to what Germany spends, it would be de facto a huge tax cut for the vast majority of the population.
That's the sort of thing that, in theory, it sounds like some conservative politicians would be behind, but obviously for some reasons they are not. One of the other topics I want to make sure that we touch on is the topic of how overworked we are. So you talk about why we're actually the most overworked country. Why is that?
Basically, what does overworked mean? I set up a definition of it along with my buddy Matt Brunig, basically saying that you need a control for wealth. So poor countries work a lot because they just need to work that much to kind of pay the bills or whatever. Greece, people work even more than in the United States, but Greece is a middle income country. So if you sort of plot a trend line and then find the distance between the trend line and the actual hours work, you find that that distance is the largest for the United States. And the reason is that we, back in the 1970s, we were sort of middle of the pack. And since that time, all European social democratic welfare states and even the fairly conservative places like Switzerland, they've cut their working hours on purpose. They have more paid vacation time, more paid sick leave, more paid maternity leave. The things that allow people to cut down their working hours. It just generally is sort of like a norm of politics and business, that the purpose of like having a rich country, one of them at least, is that you could take time off, and everyone in Finland can go down to Italy during the summer, the wintertime when it's really cold. And so they made a collective decision to cut down on the amount of work because it was just a nice thing to be able to do. And the United States didn't do anything, and our working hours have barely changed since the 1970s. And so now we're just hideously overworked by rich country standards.
Isn't Finland the country that's experimenting more with a 4-day work week now? I believe that.
Yeah, there are a number of places that are kind of looking at that, just trying to push the frontier forward, eventually, permanent 3-day weekend or kind of like spreading it out day to day, because there are certain things, of course, that do have to happen every day. You got to keep the lights on and so forth. But yeah, there's no reason why you wouldn't, stop where Finland or Norway or Germany, ironically, for the hardworking German stereotype, Germans are currently, I think, the least working country in the planet. If Americans worked as much as Germans, we'd have an extra 11 and a half weeks of vacation every year. That is a true fact.
Weeks?
Weeks, yes.
I don't know exactly what I would do to fill that time, but I would love to find out, actually.
Yeah.
And look, this is a topic that we on the show talk about a lot about how, like close to a century ago, we established the weekend, and despite massive gains in productivity and all of that, we've never expanded it. And clearly, you can. These experiments are happening in so many different places, but it's the reason I find this topic so interesting that it's barely even a topic of conversation in American political discourse about even having as an aspirational goal that we would end up having more time to spend with friends and family, to not work quite as much. I mean, Biden got into office, there was talk about possibly having some sort of maternal or paternity leave. And that's one of many things that has sort of just fallen apart. So I'm glad that you're talking about it in the book, because it's something that I feel like needs to be a bigger part of our conversation politically.
It's not, I mean, it's a policy problem. It's a problem that, it's impossible to pass anything through the legislature because our Constitution is 150 years out of date. But it's also a cultural problem. Americans valorize work to a frankly unhealthy extent. Some of the most hardest people putting the most work in hours wise are people who are very rich. You have a lot of financiers, tech workers, game developers and stuff. You read about the horrible crunch periods and people who make video games. These people make a lot of money, and there's sort of nothing stopping them from, forming a union or something and demanding lower hours. In fact, I think it would probably help to make video games more like the movie industry, which doesn't struggle so much with logistical issues like that, because it's unionizing, because people are forced to economize on labor instead of just like using people up. But I think it's come like hustle culture. You see this even in like hip hop and stuff like that. You got to hustle hard. You got to go make money, and like that's such a aspirational cultural touchstone for so many people in a way that is pretty unhealthy. And I think we need to cultivate, frankly, a culture of entitlement and laziness. That's what we need to be working on.
We do. I've always appreciated, a friend of the show, Ken Klippenstein, often tweets Rise and Grind, and we've tried to live that life. But yeah, maybe we need to back off of that a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, we've only delved into a couple of the many topics that are discussed in this book. The book is How Are You Going to Pay for That? Smart Answers to the Dumbest Questions in Politics. Ryan Cooper, fascinating, and we really appreciate you taking time out to join us on the show today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.